Picture this scene in an academic office in Aarhus, Denmark. Resting on top of a whiteboard in a room full of high-level research is a rough, ordinary block of wood. Scrawled across it in marker is just one single word: ethics.
Right.
It looks like a prop from a comedy sketch, but it was actually the desperate solution to a bureaucratic nightmare. A professor there had been awarded a prestigious EU grant, but the agency refused to release the money unless her work underwent an ethics board review.
Okay, a standard requirement.
A standard requirement, exactly. But here's the problem. Denmark doesn't actually have a government review board for non-medical studies.
So she was stuck.
She was trapped in a catch-22. She needed approval from a body that just, didn't exist. So her postdoc went out, found a piece of lumber, wrote on it, and handed her a literal ethics board.
That's incredible.
It's an absurd image, a piece of wood standing in for institutional oversight. But that block of wood actually acts as the perfect totem for a much darker, more chaotic reality in the scientific world. Because while the Danish system struggles with institutional lag and bureaucracy, other nations have rules that are dangerously loose or systems that actively enable deception.
Yes.
Just take a look at the recent scandal out of the University of Zurich. While the Danes were worrying about wooden boards, Swiss researchers were unleashing bots onto Reddit.
And these weren't just data scrapers.
Not at all. These weren't just scraping data, they were assuming fake personas, pretending to be victims of sexual assault or marginalized minorities, and actively manipulating real human users to change their political views.
Wow.
And the most unsettling part, despite how structurally deceptive and frankly how potentially harmful that sounds, under their country's specific policies, they were technically allowed to do it.
Right, it fell through the cracks.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to dive into this absurdity because it highlights the chaotic, dangerous reality of ethical oversight in global research and innovation, or R&I. We need to dissect the gaps in governance, examine how normalized deception has become in both academia and industry, and look hard at the severe consequences of this modern manipulation on public trust.
That is exactly the core tension we need to explore. The systems we have for research ethics assessment, or EA, they're highly fragmented.
Right.
They critically lack unity, share recognized approaches and professional standards across different scientific fields, organizations, and, as you just noted, different countries. The mechanisms that were established decades ago were designed for a different era for clinical trials, not for borderless internet research, where a researcher in Zurich can instantly impact a conversation in, say, Sydney or Seoul.
A completely different world.
A completely different world. And we are dealing with an assessment landscape that is expanding rapidly, trying to catch up to the speed of innovation, but it is doing so without any corresponding efforts to harmonize approaches or, introduce quality assurance. That imbalance is what creates these massive dangerous gaps that allow practices like the Zurich manipulation to occur, even if they are technically permissible by local standards.
So before we get deeper into the chaos, let's make sure we have our terms straight. We are talking about ethics assessment EA. It sounds like a bureaucratic umbrella term. How do we distinguish EA from, say, a professional standard code of conduct?
That distinction is crucial. Ethical guidance is, it's the statement of principles, rules, codes, and recommendations that research is expected or recommended to adhere to. Think of the Hippocratic Oath for medicine or a professional code for engineers. It tells you what you should do.
The principle.
The principles, yes. Ethics assessment, by contrast, refers to any kind of institutionalized review, appraisal, or valuation of R&I practices, products, or goals that primarily uses ethical principles or criteria. EA is the systematic process of review, performed by an institutional body, an ethics committee, an internal review board, or IRB, or an ethics office.
So it's the doing of the review.
It's the doing. It's the body that looks at the grant applications, the research protocols, new technologies, or even the ethical implications of entire research directions and gives a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
So EA is the systematic institutional review process, the gatekeeper, if you will. And yet globally, the data shows this widespread problem where there is a striking lack of shared vocabularies, standards, and methodologies. Why is the global academic community so far from consensus on something so fundamental?
Well, this lack of unity fundamentally hampers mutual learning and, I would argue, scientific progress itself. And it's occurring precisely at a time when we are seeing this massive, rapid expansion of ethics assessment structures everywhere, in universities, in corporations, and in government organizations.
But it's all happening in isolation.
Exactly. This expansion is happening in an uncoordinated manner, developing independently in different silos: a medical silo, a humanities silo, an engineering silo. Because there are no major efforts to harmonize these new structures, the fragmentation just continues.
And that leads directly to the block of wood scenario in one country and the unregulated manipulation scenario in another.
Precisely. This failure to standardize is one of the greatest obstacles to achieving what's called responsible research and innovation, which absolutely requires the coherent identification and consistent assessment of ethical issues across borders.
Historically, when we talk about formal ethics structures, we inevitably start with the medical field.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where the concept of oversight really solidified, right?
Oh, absolutely. The medical and life sciences have the most extensive and robust ethical structures, largely dominated by what is called principlism.
Principlism.
Yes. This approach is based on the four fundamental ethical principles: autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. This framework emerged as a distinct activity in the late 1940s and early 1950s, really driven by historical abuses and focused on clinical trials involving human subjects.
And the immediate physical risks posed by intervention.
That's the key. The focus was on physical harm.
But this single powerful approach is now struggling to handle the sheer diversity of modern research. What are the major drawbacks of this medical model when institutions attempt to apply it wholesale everywhere else?
There are two main, and they're sort of intertwined, problems. First, even within its own medical context, principlism struggles to accommodate other ethical issues beyond the physical risks inherent in trials. More critically, it lacks a fully developed, agreed-upon method for balancing the principles against each other when they conflict.
Wait, I need a practical example of that conflict. If I have four guiding principles: autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice, and they all seem, perfectly reasonable, how do they practically fail to balance?
Okay, let's take a clear one. Consider the conflict between autonomy, which is the participant's right to choose or refuse treatment, and beneficence,
which is the researcher's duty to do good.
the duty to provide an intervention that offers the most good or benefit, yes. So if you are testing a potentially life-saving drug, but the patient with the disease, perhaps due to cognitive impairment or language barriers or simply an irrational fear, refuses the drug, what do you do?
Right.
How does the system tell you when or if the duty to provide the best outcome outweighs the right to refuse? The medical framework is often silent on the exact weighting mechanism or, the ethical decision rule when two positive principles clash. This ambiguity makes it a bit of a blunt tool.
So that's the internal conflict. But the second problem, the inadequacy of the fit, when you try to transfer it somewhere else, that seems much broader.
It is. It is the crux of the fragmentation challenge. Transferring this medical framework to non-medical fields like the social sciences, humanities, or engineering is challenging and, to be honest, often fundamentally unsuccessful.
Why?
Because their ethical issues and their risks differ so fundamentally.
Give us a clear contrast. Why can't a checklist designed for a biomedical lab work for, say, a humanities or a sociology research project?
The focus is just all wrong. Medical research primarily centers on the risk of physical harm to human research participants: a blood draw, a surgical intervention, a side effect from a drug. The protocols, the forms, everything is built to mitigate these physiological risks. But fields like the social sciences, they often pose far greater risks of psychological harm, or social stigmatization, or even reputational damage.
Things you can't measure with a blood test.
Exactly. For instance, a sociologist studying gang activity or a historian collecting oral testimony from victims of political violence is not risking physical harm in the same way. But they are dealing with highly sensitive data that, if it leaked, could lead to job loss, social ostracism, or even life-threatening repercussions for their participants.
Right. The stakes are just as high, but in a different way.
Precisely. The concept of informed consent for a clinical trial, understanding the physical risks, it just doesn't map cleanly onto the concept of informed consent when the risk is purely sociopolitical and might evolve over a decade. The existing, well-developed institutions from biomedical research are just a poor fit because they don't adequately address these other ethical concerns, things like the use of deception or covert observation or long-term data tracking in new contexts.
That structural incompatibility means we have different jurisdictions worldwide operating with wildly different standards, which, in the age of borderless internet research, feels inherently dangerous.
It is. The degree of EA institutionalization varies dramatically at the national level, creating massive jurisdictional challenges and really uneven enforcement. This directly impacts international researchers profoundly.
I mean, going back to the Zurich incident, if those same methods had been deployed in a country with a strict social science ethics review, the project might never have even gotten off the ground.
It almost certainly would not have received clearance, no.
So let's compare those national approaches.
Right.
Where do we see this limited institutionalization, and what are the consequences of that limitation?
We see limited institutionalization in various countries where either the systems are just underdeveloped or the regulatory scope is intentionally narrow. Serbia, for example, does not legally require ethics assessment for non-bioethical research at all.
At all.
Not legally required. This means that research outside of medicine often proceeds based purely on the goodwill and the personal ethical standards of the individual researcher or their immediate faculty.
Which is a huge gamble.
A massive gamble. Similarly, Poland and China exhibit limited institutionalization compared to their Western European counterparts, though the reasons differ.
How so?
In China, there's an interesting complexity. While government intervention is strong, that intervention often prioritizes national interests and strategically important research. There is historically less institutional attention given to standards like, say, animal welfare or the rigorous implementation of data protection and privacy issues, or even the legal protections for researchers themselves outside of state-sanctioned boundaries.
So what does that mean for a social media researcher?
It means that an identical methodology might be banned outright in the Netherlands, but could be completely unregulated or simply ignored in a jurisdiction that only really cares about biomedical safety.
And the places with extensive institutionalization, like Germany or the UK, they've made ethical oversight a mandatory, explicit part of the research funding landscape.
Absolutely. The Netherlands, Germany, and Austria show extensive institutionalization. In Austria, the latest 3-year performance agreements between universities and federal authorities explicitly contain the legal obligation of setting up ethics committees at universities that cover diverse fields.
So it's legally mandated.
It's in the contract with the government. And the UK's National Research Ethics Service is another prime example, particularly its rigorous standards for medical research, which sets a very high, very clear bar. This gives researchers clear guidelines, but it also subjects them to intense scrutiny.
The role of the government itself in setting that bar seems wildly different too. It determines whether an ethical review is, just an academic exercise or an actual mandated requirement.
It creates a huge structural difference in accountability. The U.S. system is relatively decentralized. The federal government has little direct authority over institutions for higher education and research.
So how does it work?
Regulations are often driven by national legislation affecting grant funding. So if you want federal money, you must have an IRB. It's not about centralized control. This means the ethics decision rests heavily with the university's IRB, which is keenly focused on avoiding the loss of federal grants.
So it's financially motivated?
In many ways, yes. And this contrasts sharply with the Chinese system, where government intervention is strong, and the independence and freedom of important research institutions are restricted because they are often directly under central leadership, primarily the Ministry of Education.
And what does that centralization mean for ethics?
It means the definition of an ethical outcome is often structurally political. It rests with the state's priorities, rather than academic or public health incentives alone.
It's clear that non-medical ethics assessment is expanding, which sounds like a good thing, but you're saying it's doing so in these silos, independent of the powerful medical tradition.
That is the very definition of fragmentation in action. This expansion in non-medical areas in engineering, computer science, social media studies is developing independently of the medical tradition rather than harmonizing with it or learning from it.
Right.
This creates major difficulties when we try to determine the feasibility of transferring ethical practices from a field like medicine, which has decades of developed ethics assessment, to a brand new field like data science or AI engineering. We risk repeating mistakes or creating systems that are simply not fit for purpose.
And if we look specifically at engineering and technology ethics, they still seem stuck focusing on internal issues and hard impacts. What are the soft impacts they're missing institutionally, and why does this matter so much today?
Yeah, that's a huge blind spot. Technology assessment has historically focused very heavily on the practice internal issues, professional integrity, avoiding conflicts of interest, and ensuring workplace safety.
And the hard impacts.
And the hard impacts: health, safety, and environmental risks. We want our bridges to be safe and our devices not to pollute. That's all good and necessary. But there is a massive institutional blind spot regarding the soft impacts.
Meaning the ethical concerns relating to technology's effects on our social realities and, well, human ideals.
Exactly. The ethics of technology must be deeply concerned with the value-ladenness of technology, how it shapes society, culture, identity, and political structure. Issues concerning human rights, for instance, are crucial in technology sectors, particularly electronics and information technology, where concepts like privacy, authenticity, and human dignity are paramount.
So when an ethics board focuses only on whether an AI product is physically safe,
But ignores how that AI might systematically embed racial or gender bias into hiring practices or judicial outcomes, they have completely failed to address the soft impact.
they've missed the bigger picture.
Entirely. The failure to address these soft impact institutionally means that research and innovation can proceed ethically according to a very narrow internal definition, say, a safe app, while having devastating consequences for social good, contributing to inequality or the erosion of democratic discourse.
This issue of soft impacts brings us directly back to the problem of deception. The Zurich researchers creating fake accounts and manipulating political discourse, that's massive soft impact.
It's a perfect example.
Whether it is an academic researcher deceiving an online community or a major corporation deceiving its customers, we're looking at methodologies that inflict social and psychological harm, often in the name of some higher goal.
The use of deception in research is indeed a long-standing, often necessary, but very controversial topic in the social and behavioral sciences. Proponents argue that it is sometimes essential to capture realistic, ecologically valid behavior.
What does that mean, ecologically valid?
It means behavior as it would naturally occur in the real world. The moment subjects know the true purpose of the experiment, say, whether they are being tested on their innate bias or their capacity for altruism, they may respond differently. They might try to conform to perceived expectations.
And the data becomes useless.
Exactly. The data then becomes useless.
And this philosophical justification leans heavily on what proponents call the ubiquity argument. Tell us how that argument attempts to justify research practices that look, to an outsider, like plain lying.
Right. So the core of the ubiquity argument suggests that deception is so common in everyday social life, from small white lies to major manipulations in marketing or diplomacy, that research should not be judged by a significantly higher moral standard than what is commonly accepted in society at large.
I see. So the argument isn't lying is good.
No, not at all. The point is not to condone lying, but to suggest that the act of misleading in research must be weighed against the context of its occurrence. We have to look at the variety of deception in concrete social contexts, some of which are deemed permissible or even necessary.
So the key isn't the act of deceiving itself, but the nature of the relationship and the context.
Exactly. That leads us to the concept of relational ethics. The permissibility of deception depends entirely on the interpersonal relationship that's established. If a research practice is analogous to a form of societal deception that is accepted within a certain relationship structure, it may be ethically justified.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think of it this way. When a coach slightly deceives a gymnast about the height of the balance beam to help them overcome performance anxiety,
Right.
the gymnast implicitly accepts that the coach, as the expert, is in a better position to make a decision that ensures a reliable outcome, given the demands of skill acquisition. The participant implicitly subjects themselves to the demands of the discipline.
That makes sense in a structured relationship where both parties have an agreed upon goal skill development, knowledge acquisition. But how does that apply to the people in the Zurich study who are being manipulated by bots posing as trauma victims? They didn't consent to be part of a discipline.
And that is precisely where the ethical line must be drawn and why the Zurich example is so alarming. The relational ethics argument breaks down completely when there is no established mutual understanding of the relationship and when the deception is used to inflict psychological or social harm without any pathway for debriefing or repair.
Right.
However, within controlled academic settings, the argument holds that the researcher is expected to reveal the deception later, not maliciously, but because that revelation often serves to enrich the educational process for the participant.
Ah, the enrichment paradox.
Yes. This paradox suggests that deceptive research that is later fully debriefed has been found in some studies to provide participants with a more enriched experience and insight into their own character than non-deceptive methods.
How so?
By realizing how they responded to a manipulated situation, perhaps showing unexpected prejudice or surprising altruism, participants may gain deep insight into their own behavior or character. This debriefing process becomes the ethical counterweight to the initial deception, assuming, of course, the deception caused no lasting harm.
That gives academic deception a theoretical ethical framework, dependent on context and debriefing. But the same practices, when transferred to commercial or industrial production, become fundamentally exploitative because the goal is no longer knowledge or enrichment.
That is the moral bridge that breaks.
Deception becomes a norm in commercial production, particularly within the competitive, profit-driven media industry.
That's it. In the commercial world, deception is less about experimental necessity and more about maintaining market advantage, extracting value, and controlling the narrative. It is normalized as an essential professional skill set. We can categorize this industrial deception through three fundamentally unethical practices that really define how modern media and creative industries operate.
Okay, let's start with the first one, industrial deception and disinformation itself. How is that structurally embedded?
This involves creating a false public reality. It encompasses tactics like launching these sunny, overly ethical corporate initiatives, like announcing a massive internal sustainability program that are primarily intended to misdirect attention from deeper systemic problems.
Like outsourcing dangerous labor practices or regulatory evasion.
Precisely. The goal is spin, misinformation, or countermarketing to steer perception and control the public narrative. You see it in the use of specialized PR fixers who actively bury negative stories, or in sophisticated viral marketing campaigns that pretend to be organic groundswell movements.
So the truth gets lost.
The result is that the value of information often diminishes the higher you go in the industrial hierarchy because executives are merely reciting scripted talking points designed to amplify a managerial utopia while obscuring the ethically problematic labor behind it.
The second category sounds even more insidious, industrial coercion and bullying.
This practice relies on the constant power imbalance between the employer and the aspiring worker or creator. It is normalized through the systemic exploitation of labor and talent, often rationalized through a toxic paying your dues mythology.
What kind of practices are we talking?
We're talking about relying heavily on unpaid interns for necessary high-level work under the guise of experience, or enforcing inordinately long employment periods for personal assistants or junior staff under conditions of low pay and extreme overwork.
And legal threats.
Oh, absolutely. The most chilling part is using punitive legal threats like cease and desist or takedown orders against fair use independent documentary makers or whistleblowers. This systemic managerial sadism becomes part of the accepted, unwritten production culture.
And the third fundamental, industrial extraction, involves leveraging soft capital and stealing ideas, something that has become dramatically easier in the online platform era.
This is the intentional harvesting of value from independent creators without compensation. It includes requiring independent creators to pre-develop massive fan bases and sophisticated intellectual property before a studio will even consider engaging with them.
They're offloading all the risk.
All of it. It also manifests through practices like using fake script contests, entrant-funded film festivals, or pitch fests that charge submission fees. The goal of these contests isn't necessarily to find a winner, but to cull thousands of ideas and concepts to inform the studio's own internal feature development slate.
So they're using unpaid labor as a massive R&D department.
That's exactly what it is.
You're saying they steal the ideas wholesale without credit or payment by creating a system designed to elicit submissions.
Absolutely. The most brazen example involves the use of showrunner-absent writers' rooms, where established executives collect concepts for future franchises and then have staff refine them, but the original creator is entirely cut out.
That's unbelievable.
And executives have actually shamelessly referred to this practice as becoming innovative miners who will beg, borrow, and steal from others to develop a franchise without shame or credit.
Wait, innovative mining, that's truly brazen. So they've actually reframed intellectual property theft as a positive, proactive business strategy for internal innovation. That is a profound moral inversion.
It speaks to how deeply embedded deception is. The language is designed to sanitize the exploitation. But the key question remains. What are the concrete, measurable harms of this industrial deception beyond the abstract loss of public and institutional trust?
Right. Let's look at the digital realm again, specifically the use of deceptive AI.
Studies on deceptive chatbot use provide very clear data on the measurable harm. Chatbots offer huge economic opportunities for efficiency and cost reduction, but customers generally prefer human operators.
Which creates a strong incentive for organizations to use bots without disclosing it.
A very strong incentive. However, the decision for non-disclosure has far-reaching negative effects for the organization's reputation and for its internal staff.
Specifically, how does it affect the customers and the public perception?
Prospective customers perceive the organization as significantly less ethical if chatbot use is not transparently disclosed. This is a direct and measurable reputational harm that damages the brand's standing in the market, often incurring hidden costs that far outweigh the operational savings from using the bot.
And the harm extends internally to the employees who are forced to participate in the deception. They become agents of the unethical corporate culture.
That's a critical point that's often overlooked. Staff required to facilitate the deceptive chatbot use report significantly greater turnover intentions.
So they're more likely to quit.
Much more likely. Furthermore, these employees receive worse job opportunities from recruiters in subsequent studies. The organization's unethical practice, therefore, not only drives away current talent, but also harms the professional future and career prospects of the employees tasked with carrying it out.
The cost of deception is externalized onto the employee.
Exactly.
This pervasive influence of digital and industrial deception leads us to a crucial structural transformation in the ethical landscape. The sheer size, complexity, and power of social media companies, entities that are purely profit-driven, mean they have risen to become powerful de facto oversight bodies.
Yes, they become the new gatekeepers. They now functionally replace or override traditional academic review mechanisms, often to the severe detriment of critical independent research.
We've seen this most clearly with the platform formerly known as Twitter, now X. For over a decade, it was the central nervous system for academic research into public conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Historically, platforms like Twitter offered generous, often free API application programming interface access. This open door enabled thousands of academic papers to be written based on massive amounts of data scraped from public conversations.
It was essential for understanding what was happening in the world in real time.
It was. You could track global trends, misinformation cascades, and shifts in public opinion as they were happening. It was an unprecedented tool for social science.
But the abrupt imposition of paywalls led to the API lockdown, effectively shutting down this era of open data.
The change was immediate, it was arbitrary, and it was devastating. The generous free access vanished almost overnight. The cost for basic access is now around $100 per month for just 10,000 tweets.
Which is a microscopic data set for most large-scale academic studies.
It's nothing. A survey of affected researchers revealed that over 100 established, often multi-year projects were immediately canceled, halted, or forced to pivot to other platforms.
What were the most tangible, concrete losses that resulted from this lockdown?
Crucial tools that were central to understanding the platform's integrity are now defunct. A prime example is Botometer.
Botometer, right.
It was a critical tool developed by a team at Indiana University. It was the industry standard specifically used to detect malicious, coordinated bot activity on the platform, a key factor in ensuring election integrity and fighting misinformation. The current owner of X had even cited this tool previously.
And now?
Without the necessary API access, it is functionally dead. Furthermore, research on crucial real-time events like the spread of misinformation during conflicts or around upcoming major elections is now impossible at the scale needed to draw generalized conclusions.
So if researchers want to track, say, the surge in hate speech towards specific minorities following a policy change, they can only look at small, non-generalizable data sets or rely on subjective sampling methods.
Precisely. Before the lockdown, researchers had documented massive spikes, such as anti-Semitic content shooting up 61% in just 2 weeks following the platform's acquisition. But trying to track those real-time trends now involves looking for a needle in a haystack within the limited page structure. The generalizable scale, the ability to say this is happening to millions of users, is gone.
Which is a crucial ethical blow because it prevents independent oversight of social harm.
Yes.
But surely the platform owners argue this is necessary for data security, to stop bad actors from scraping personally identifiable information, or to prevent their platform from being weaponized by foreign governments.
That is the official counter-narrative, yes. However, academics strongly argue that these API restrictions are primarily strategic and financial.
It's about money.
It's about money and control. It is a calculated move to lock out third parties and consolidate the platform's position as the main analytics and advertising broker. This strengthens their business model of data control, making them the singular, unchallenged source for information about their platform's health.
So you can't trust the data because it's coming from them.
You have to trust their internal self-serving reports. And Facebook announced similar API restrictions designed specifically to consolidate data control. If you want to know what's happening on our platform, you must come to us and pay.
And this data control is heavily reinforced by the legal structure, which creates a widespread chilling effect across the research community.
The concern about legal repercussions is now widespread among researchers. This spiked particularly after X's high-profile, aggressive lawsuit against the Center for Countering Digital Hate, or CCDH.
The nonprofit group that had documented the rise of hate speech.
Using public data, yes. The survey found that around 50% of affected researchers were increasingly worried about potential legal actions resulting from continuing critical studies of the platform.
So if you study a topic the corporation deems negative to its business model, you risk being sued out of existence.
That's the chilling effect. Independent oversight is being severely limited as researchers self-censor their critical questions to avoid legal risk.
So if X has become a data desert, where are researchers pivoting now that the golden era is over?
They are seeking new wells of public data. Researchers are pivoting primarily to platforms like Reddit, which has become the most popular platform of choice, followed by TikTok and YouTube.
Why those?
They are turning to these platforms because they're popular and still offer some form of API access, though the amount of data is not comparable to the immense scale previously available on X. Reddit is particularly popular because it is topic-based, making it easier to study specific communities.
But those alternative platforms maintain their own unique forms of control over academic inquiry, essentially replacing the academic review board with a corporate review board.
Exactly. The problem of the corporate gatekeeper simply moves to a new address. Some platforms, like TikTok, place very specific limits on researcher access, sometimes requiring researchers to run projects by them or obtain explicit approval for their methodology and goals.
So the platform itself becomes the ethics board.
It introduces ethical scrutiny that is controlled by the corporation itself, meaning the platform becomes a de facto regulator with its own profit incentives and proprietary data concerns influencing what questions can even be asked. Moving forward, the only silver linings researchers see are methods relying on user consent, like data donation research, where users voluntarily share their data and political efforts, especially in Europe, to require platforms to make some data available to researchers for public good.
Which brings us to the growing role of unified governance. We've established that the current ethical landscape is chaotic, jurisdictionally fragmented, philosophically strained by self-justifying deception, and increasingly controlled by corporate gatekeepers with profit motives. Clearly, there's a desperate need for standardization and enforcement that respects the borderless nature of modern research.
There is.
And the efforts to standardize seem to be coalescing around the European Union, specifically through the concept of responsible research and innovation.
The EU's primary strategy for standardization is Responsible Research and Innovation, or RRI. RRI is explicitly aimed at better aligning research with broad societal challenges and ensuring ethical conduct across the R&I spectrum. It moves far beyond simple compliance checks.
It's a different philosophy.
It is. It's an attempt to embed ethics at the conception stage of a project, not just at the review stage.
How does RRI achieve this goal of alignment and ethical embedding?
RRI fundamentally emphasizes scientific responsibility, which involves systematically considering the long-term impacts and consequences of R&I. This means looking down the road, trying to anticipate complex causal pathways that traditional ethics assessment focused on immediate subject risk completely missed.
Like the issue of dual use.
Exactly. It directly addresses complex issues such as dual use.
Give us a classic example of dual use in research. Why does traditional ethics assessment often miss this risk?
Okay, dual use occurs when research conducted for a benign civilian purpose, say, developing a new material for improved medical implants, is later discovered to have a military or criminal application.
Like being perfectly suited for reinforcing bunker walls or small-scale missile casings.
Precisely. Traditional ethics review often focuses exclusively on the researcher's intent and the direct application, the implant. But RI requires the researcher to anticipate that unintended consequence, the misuse of the knowledge or technology outside their control, and potentially redesign the research to mitigate that risk, or at least disclose it.
So RRI forces researchers to be accountable for the full range of possible consequences, not just their direct aims.
It shifts the moral burden considerably, yes.
But the biggest hammer the EU wields globally, and the mechanism that truly forces compliance worldwide, is the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. This is a data privacy law that has essentially transcended its geography.
Indeed. The GDPR is the world's strictest, most comprehensive data privacy law, and its influence is immense due to its global jurisdiction. This is the key.
How does that global jurisdiction work?
It applies to any organization anywhere in the world if they process the personal data of EU citizens or residents, or even if they simply offer goods or services to them. Enacted in 2018, it effectively establishes a high global baseline for research ethics related to data.
So if you are an American university researcher dealing with data from European social media users, you must comply with GDPR, even if your national ethics board has looser standards.
You must comply, period.
And the penalty structure is so severe that it forces large organizations and international research consortia to take it seriously, regardless of where they are headquartered.
The fines are designed to be punitive and financially ruinous for large entities, up to 20 million or 4% of global annual revenue, whichever is higher. This level of financial risk compels large corporations and, by extension, any large research institution involved in international data-driven innovation to adopt GDPR-compliant practices worldwide. It's the closest thing we have to a unified, enforceable global standard for data processing.
Let's focus on the key principles of GDPR that directly affect researchers handling data. The law mandates compliance with 7 core principles. We start with transparency and purpose limitation.
First, transparency. Data processing must be lawful, fair, and transparent to the data subject. Researchers must communicate clearly and in plain language about exactly what is being done with the information. They can't hide processing activities in complex terms of service.
And purpose limitation.
Second is purpose limitation. Data must be processed only for the legitimate and explicit purposes specified when it was collected. If you collect data for a climate study, you cannot later use it for marketing or a military application unless you get new, specific consent.
Followed by data minimization, which seems like a direct challenge to the data extraction models we discussed in the commercial world.
It is a critical countermeasure. Researchers must collect and process only the data that is absolutely necessary for the specified purpose. This principle prevents the arbitrary hoarding of sensitive information or the collection of massive amounts of irrelevant data just in case. They also must ensure accuracy, meaning personal data must be kept up to date, and storage limitation, meaning personally identifying data can only be stored as long as necessary and must be deleted or anonymized thereafter.
It prevents that long-term vulnerability.
Yes.
Crucially, what does GDPR require regarding consent? Because we saw how easily consent can be circumvented or coerced in the academic and industrial realms.
GDPR's consent rules are extremely strict and detailed. Consent must be freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous. It has to be easily distinguishable from other matters. You cannot hide it in 50 pages of legal jargon.
It has to be clear.
It must be presented in clear and plain language, and most importantly for data subjects, it must be easily withdrawn at any time. For researchers, this means they must maintain robust documentary evidence of consent and honor the withdrawal request immediately and comprehensively. This elevates autonomy dramatically over all other principles.
And finally, the overarching rule for the data controller is accountability.
The data controller, the university, the professor, the corporation, is responsible for demonstrating compliance with all 7 principles. This isn't theoretical. It means maintaining detailed documentation, training staff, and implementing security measures like encryption by design.
By design.
This leads to the principle of data protection by design and by default, meaning ethical data protection must be considered and built into the design of any new product, research protocol, or activity right from the start, rather than being patched on as an afterthought.
It sounds like RI and GDPR together are trying to replace reactive ethical reviews, the ones waiting for the scandal to happen, with a system where ethical requirements are an intrinsic, mandatory feature of the research design process, forcing borderless research to finally adhere to a global standard.
That is the essential goal. The expansion of ethics assessment globally is a necessary reality, but without a powerful, unified framework like RRI backed by laws like the GDPR, research ethics remains perpetually vulnerable to the gaps created by national fragmentation and the overwhelming economic incentives for industrial and digital deception. The question is whether harmonization can win the race against the pace of technological innovation.
We have seen the extremes today. The casual, national inadequacy of ethics reviews symbolized by the Danish block of wood, juxtaposed against the highly organized, profit-driven control exerted by global tech giants acting as API gatekeepers. The ethics assessment landscape needs to mature rapidly.
It does.
The expansion we observe needs to be accompanied by harmonization, shared standards, and quality assurance that respect the borderless nature of contemporary research and innovation.
The struggle, fundamentally, is to ensure that research, which is designed to identify societal benefits, adheres to core ethical values like human rights and dignity, especially when operating in a complex, fragmented world where the economic incentive for deception and extraction is dangerously high. The systems established decades ago, dominated by principlism tailored for physical risks, must urgently evolve to systematically address soft impacts, the threats to human identity, culture, and justice caused by new technologies.
Right.
The focus must shift from reacting to scandals to proactively embedding responsibility at the inception of every single project.
The effort is to replace fragmentation and reactive measures with a truly responsible and unified global approach. The tension between absolute scientific freedom and necessary social responsibility is the core conflict that must be resolved if we are to restore trust in science and ensure that the next technological leap is guided by something more substantial than a scribbled note on a piece of lumber.